Yes. Hi, everybody. This is Arthi from Human Chapters. I'll tell you a little bit about human chapters. Humans are living narratives with the past, present, and future. These narratives constitute of a number of chapters across a lifespan. The aim of these conversations is to highlight a chapter of the narrative and unpack its connections to other chapters. I don't care whether people are natural storytellers, but I truly do believe each one of us has a worthy story to share. In acknowledgement to country, we acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet. We pay respect to their tribal elders, past and present and emerging. We celebrate their continuing culture and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. Today, we are going to be speaking to Kiaya about her chapter, Speech Pathology and Education. Welcome, Kiaya. Tell us a
Oh,
bit
thank
about yourself.
thank you so much for having me, Artie. It's really great to chat to you. I am a speech pathologist who works in the area of literacy, I guess. That's really it in a nutshell. I like to do lots of different things, and I'm still lucky enough to have hobbies outside of my work, which is always very nice, keeping me well balanced. But I'm really excited to talk to you today about, yeah, just how it's all going.
That is so wonderful. Kaya, this is a two-part question. Tell us
Go
about
for it.
speech pathology, and then tell us about why you're drawn to education or literacy specifically.
Yeah, cool. Okay, great. So, speech pathology is a beautiful, diverse field that no one really seems to understand. It covers um, so many different disciplines. So, when we graduate from speech pathology, we are equipped to work with like neonate kids with swallowing difficulties right up to end of life communication and swallowing there as well. There are lots of different disciplines within speech pathology, and I think what surprises people most is that you can work with adults or children. You can work in schools, you can work in practice, you can work in the community. There are just so many different places where speech pathologists work. When I graduated speech pathology, I was convinced I was going to be a hospital girly with my little shoes and like walking around the hospitals. I was so deeply fascinated by all the, I guess, neurological side of speech pathology. So the language, the cognition, the memory, all of that sort of stuff really excited me. And I guess that was kind of because before I did speech pathology, I did psychology and really loved the neuro and language subjects there. And that really kind of lit a fire under me. So yeah, it's funny that I've ended up in literacy because I think it combines my love of working with kids with that neuro side. I think
Mm.
there is a lot of brain stuff. To oversimplify it, there's a lot of brain stuff with literacy, and I really love it. And I was so um, excited to find a field that so deeply connected with all of my interests. I think when you graduate pathology, it feels like you're either working with kids with lisps or adults who have had a stroke. And it's just, it's really nice to find myself in an area that I feel really passionate about and that just speaks to me on a number of different levels, I guess. Yes.
That's amazing, Kaya. Listening to your journey and thinking about my personal journey. We're from two very separate parts of the world, yet our parallels are very similar. It is ridiculous.
Yes.
Before I became a speech pathologist, neurosurgery was, I was never going to become a neurosurgeon, but I was fascinated by the brain,
Mhm.
the inner workings of the brain and just how the power of it.
Yes.
Ever since I was a kid and having certain language difficulties, I think fascinated me even
Mm.
to think about, well, how does learning happen? And therefore, I mean, why not neurosurgery? I mean, it's just,
Why not? I mean, I think it's a logical place to go because, we get so excited about how the brain works and how it functions. And the most obvious place to look for more information about that is like in the neuro disciplines. And yeah, I think you probably found yourself also surprised that there's that much neuro stuff in what we do. So yeah.
absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your journey, like your whole
Yeah.
career, and then what really led you into literacy, and then we can unpack that part of your career.
I'd love to. Yes, yes. Okay. So as I said, I studied psychology. That was not my first degree. I have a whole life in theatre and events in production and the comedy festival and all sorts of things, but we're just gonna like jump over that part.
Yeah.
And start. So I studied a graduate diploma of psychology, and in that there was an amazing professor who was talking about how language happens and how we develop writing. And she had some really cool experiments about developing writing systems. And I was just enamored. I was just like, this is incredible. I want to learn so much more about this. I knew psychology wasn't right for me, but the learning about language was, and I was like, brilliant. Let's go do speech pathology. And speech pathology was amazing. And as I said, I left speech pathology convinced I was going to be an adult neuro girly, and I was really lucky enough to get interviews with all the major hospitals in Australia, in Melbourne, where I am from. But I didn't quite get the jobs. And, obviously I was like heartbroken at the time, but it's funny how it all works out. I ended up doing a PD day at like a professional learning in Little Learners Love Literacy, which is a program that I had come across during one of my placements. And I thought, why not? Let's go do it. It sounded interesting. And I happened to be sitting at a table with a triple S speechy, a department speechy, who I went from being very unemployed to at the end of that day, I had two jobs. And it was just a wonderful experience. So yeah, I was sitting at a table with the triple S speechy who said, one of my schools is hiring a speechy. You should definitely go apply for it. And then Maureen Pollard, who is the founder of Little Learners Love Literacy, she happened to turn up to the PD at the end of the day. And I spoke to her and I was just like, I'd love to work with you. And she was like, brilliant. Let's have a coffee tomorrow. And it was so fantastic. So I ended up working part-time at the school and part-time with Maureen. And back then, we were just we were just operating out of a spare room in Maureen's house. So it was fantastic. And it was just her, I, and another person who worked a little bit as well. And it was incredible. And she is such a powerhouse and such an amazing person to be around, I guess. She really held my hand and guided me through into the world of literacy. And I honestly couldn't have asked for a more passionate or just amazing woman to do that. So I at the I ended up working full time with Maureen for a little while. She offered me a position and I was just like, I can't turn that down. And it was wonderful. While I wasn't doing clinical stuff, I got to, I guess it's more of like a consultative sort of role. There's a bit of everything really, because small business, you just do a bit of everything. So, but I got to learn about how decodable books were made. I got to learn about how literacy programs were created. I got to been have really robust discussions about, scope and sequence and learning and how to approach different spelling rules. And I just sort of found myself in this world. It was amazing. And, Maureen, through her, I guess, I got to have these incredible experiences. There was one year where I think we went to the big conference DSF in Perth, the Language and Literacy Conference. We went to Research Ed, and also I think there was a LDA big thing as well, all in one year. And it was just, oh, felt on top of the world, like we were going to change everything. It was going to be amazing. I loved it. It was brilliant. Um, and yeah, I got to meet Mandy Nathan from DSF in Perth
Yeah.
and collaborate on some decodable books. It was an amazing time, an amazing time. And um, Maureen just really, she let me just have access to a library. It was brilliant, I got to read so many books. It was amazing. And I guess throughout that time, I had kept in rough contact with Tanya Seri, who was one of my professors at, oh, I don't think she's technically called a professor, but associate professor. Anyway, whatever title she has, brilliant, wonderful woman. Um, I kept in contact with Tanya throughout this time, and she really helped me point me in the direction of a couple of different professional learning opportunities, and it was brilliant. And I absolutely loved my work with Maureen. We did really well. And we worked together for a couple of years. And then the Decodable Books got some funding in New South Wales, and her business just like blew up overnight. It was crazy. It was crazy. And she was really able to grow her business, and it was honestly so amazing to to watch. It was so good, but it became really obvious that like she didn't need a speechy who, did lots of different odds and ends. She needed like a proper team, a publishing house, I guess. And it coincided with the time when I was just like, I really want to get back to clinical work. So it worked out really well that I stopped working with Maureen and I started working um, doing some clinical work, seeing some clients out of a lovely place called the Dyslexia Hub in Greensborough. And that was amazing because I got to work with other people who were also interested in literacy and dyslexia. And there were teachers, there was a psych, there was a couple of speechies as well. And it was a really sort of multidisciplinary hub. And I really loved getting back in there and working with kids and being part of this team kind of and then the great panini happened and everything sort of went a bit awry. But with a few bumps along the way, I ended up moving my clinic closer to home, so I could get all, the family logistics happening. Um, and I, a year or so ago, I think must have been, I connected with Tanya again and was just like, hey, Tanya, so amazed at what you're doing with the solar lab. It looks incredible. If you got anything happening, let me know. And she's like, well, actually, we do have a few things. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're doing this now. So I've been working in my clinic, seeing clients in mostly literacy, but some other stuff as well. I see them in the clinic and in schools. And then I'm also working on a research project with the Solar Lab. And then I'm also teaching in the School of Education and the Speech Pathology uh, departments, I guess, at La Trobe as well. So it's been a little wild, a little crazy, and a bit of everything.
That is amazing. Do you mind if I ask you a few sort of questions,
Please.
taking you back to your work with Maureen Pollard?
Yes.
what was your, like, I know you've done lots of different bits and pieces within her business, but in relation to speech pathology,
Yes.
what were some of the elements that you contributed to and
Oh, what a great
loved?
question. Do you know what? It was so funny. I remember a day when we were sitting there making funny sounds with our mouths, a classic speechy pastime. And I was just like, ah, yes, I'm bringing so much linguistics and articulation, I guess, knowledge, as well as the oral language and all of those extra things that we do bring as speechies. So there was some practical things in terms of, I guess, the phonemic awareness and the phonics, and I guess endless discussions on how many sounds and where the schwa was, and those sorts of really interesting linguistic speech mesh sort of discussions. And then it was also a great opportunity for me to chat to Maureen, I guess, about the role of oral language and background knowledge and all of those things that we know are really important to literacy, which she absolutely knew too. But I think it was wonderful to have those discussions with um, a peer, really. Yeah, someone who could talk about it. So, I mean, it's not like you can just flip open a book, any of Maureen's book, and be like, oh, there, that's the speech part. It's sort
Yeah.
of woven all throughout, and I guess you can see that in the some of the analytical approach, I guess. Oh, that's not a great word to use, but um, the way we picked certain words or the way that we structured the vowels, those sorts of things. It's hard to describe.
Yeah. And Kaya, I love that you said it isn't one particular thing that identifies the speech pathologist's contribution to it. It's actually so interwoven and integrated that it almost seems seamless, which is why
Yes.
it's so difficult to explain uh, the sort of interconnectedness of various elements working together and how
Yeah, you're
in
absolutely right.
play. Something that I'm thinking about in terms of you talked about linguistics, but decodable books, going building from simple through to complex. I'm thinking not just the decodable part of it, which is your sound structures and going from
Mm,
simple to complex phonics code, but also thinking about your sentence structures and how you're still going from simple to complex, your vocabulary, your all those elements of language comprehension as well within that
absolutely.
group. Yeah.
Yeah, there was so much that goes into it. And I think I've done my job well because there isn't a single page that is just like, and here is the speech pathology part. I really think the what I contributed in whatever small part um, really helped solidify the ideas that Maureen already had and the instincts that she already had. Because it's not as if I wrote the Dakota books. God, no, like that is a whole nother mission. And people often ask me, oh, now that you've worked in decodable books, would you ever write your own? I'm like, nope,
Yeah.
no way. That is too hard. Um, but it was in all the discussions we had about, consonant clusters, adjacent consonants, the reason why, truck sound like the TR sounds like a ch sound and why that can trip kids up a lot. And just, I don't know, stuff like that. It was, yeah, yes.
And I really appreciate you highlighting the endless conversations.
Mm,
Those conversations, the potential they have, the seeds that are placed within those conversations, and how they sort of slowly blossom as the conversation
Yeah.
goes on, progresses, but also multiple conversations that stem from it.
Yeah.
Now, I find that constantly in my work with schools, one conversation leading to another, but it's all about,
Mm.
this is the observation. This is why it's happening, like a few reasons, but this is what we can be doing about it. Let's trial it.
Absolutely.
But trialing it from a place of not from a place of not knowing, but from a place of actually knowing and knowing what to target.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
think that's a great example because it speaks to that those sort of half conversations that would happen where they'd just be like, "Oh, I wonder why blah blah blah." And then normally they'd be like, "Oh, well, move on." Where I'm just like, "Well, actually, it's because of da 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 da." And it just opened up those opportunities for conversation and talking about, I guess, the real nitty-gritty of our language, our beautiful language.
That's exactly it. And that power of explanation.
Mm.
The more I find myself explaining, the more I find myself learning and going, actually, wait a minute. I didn't realize, I'm telling you now, but I didn't realize these two things connect.
Yes.
It's in this conversation that became solidified. It's just,
Yes.
it's fascinating.
Yes.
Um, Thank you for that. My second question to you is your speech pathology clinic. I'd love
Mm.
to hear how you started up. Like, what was, how did you set up the programs? Like, what did you, only if you don't mind sharing,
Of
but
course,
I'm
I'm
just,
very happy to.
yeah,
Um, well, I'll definitely put this caveat on, which is please, if you're a new graduate speech pathologist, do not start your own business, please. It is just everyone will tell you that, and you're going to be like, no, I can do it. How hard can it be? And I'm here to tell you, it's really hard.
yeah,
It's really hard. And I think there's also this misconception that, there's so much money to be had in private practice, and it's just not true. It's just not true. I mean, maybe if you run a sort of empire with so many
mm,
species working underneath you, but it's just not the reality of it. So,
yeah,
I was so lucky that when I started my clinic, Maureen just opened up her doors and she was just like, take what you want. Like it was beautiful. And so I really had an amazing head start with that. And by that point as well, I had also done training in Sounds Right, and I had those materials, and I had also around that time, or maybe I can't remember exactly when I did it, but I also did the Autumn Gillingham training as well. So I had a lot of knowledge of lots of different programs, and I think just by working with Maureen and being aware of all the different programs, we would go to so many different conferences and events and you see the other stall holders and you get to know everything that's out there. And so I had a really good sense of what was out there, what I liked, and what I felt would work really well in a clinic intervention setting. Because at that point in time, the materials that Maureen had developed were really designed to help teachers first and foremost. They were designed to be whole classroom, tier one, tier one
yeah,
instruction, and they required a little bit of adapting to get them to work for an intervention or clinical setting. But like, I think what I love about Maureen's stuff and why I keep coming back to it is it's just so bright and cheerful and colorful and like the kids really love interacting with it.
yeah.
So when I started up my clinic, I had linked in with a couple of people already, and one of the other speech pathologists, Elise Cassidy, who is just fantastic and has been, I guess, a mentor to me this whole time. She was basically the one to say, well, if you're going to start working, come over to the Dyslexia Hub. We'd love to have you. And it it was so the Dyslexia Hub is well, when I was there, it was a group practice, which means that everyone is their own business, but you're kind of under an umbrella. And that really helped get me started because it meant there was like a centralized waiting list, so to speak.
Mm.
And dyslexia services are really hard to come by. So I was lucky enough to get started and
Mm.
just run straight away, which was fantastic. But it definitely took me a little while to, I guess, Maureen's work and Little Learners is really shines in that back then the F foundation grade one space. And I was seeing kids who were in that age, but also older as well. And so I needed to find ways to adapt what I had and add to my collection so that it would be more appropriate for the older kids as well. Um, so yeah, I guess I was really lucky enough to have a lot of great, I guess, indirect supervision as well. I had two speechies. I had an amazing um, teacher, Amanda, who was also at the Dyslexia Hub. And there was someone else as well, and I'm really embarrassed to be forgetting them. But I think I was offered a lot of support in that environment. And I think that's what really helped me to um, yeah, develop. And I think there was that nice little time there before before the pandemic that helped get that business established and going. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I just think about, or I've never had a private practice or sort of that private speech pathology component.
Mm.
But when I do think about it, I appreciate the depth that you have to go into to really think about what are the services you're going to offer, what are the packages you're going to offer. What does it look like when, especially thinking about clients or students coming to us could potentially be there for a long time. It's
Absolutely. It's something that weighs on me a lot because I think in speech pathology, we have a really high ethics and a really high professional, I don't know, regulation, I guess, self-regulation. And most of the speech pathology practice is designed to, see a kid for, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever, and then discharge and see the next lot of kids. But literacy does not work that way at all. And um, you do need to keep in mind that I guess I feel a big tension between the service that I'm providing and the cost to the families, both in, financial, but also, logistics and time and all of that stuff. It's really hard. And I think when you see that these are families that are going to be seeing you weekly for years, potentially, it is like I think that's why I ended up at La Trobe because I'm just like, this is crazy. Surely there shouldn't be this many kids
yeah.
needing this much help. And when I would partner with the teachers in the schools, I was just
Mm.
like, oh my goodness, there's such a knowledge gap here, like we need to. I got, there were so many tea room discussions of like putting the worlds to rights and what we should do and what the teachers should do and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, yeah, but who's actually going to do it? So I guess that sort of spurred me on to actually do something about it rather than just continue being annoyed at the state of the world.
Absolutely. Uh, Kaya, how did you navigate, or how do you navigate that tension that arises, understanding that students will are likely to be there for a long period of time, and the understanding then it's a shared responsibility, but who shares it and how much, what percentage
Yeah.
of it is a shared responsibility?
I think that's definitely something that I have evolved. my understanding of over time, I guess. I think in the beginning, especially before I had kids, it was easy to be like, oh, parents should just X, Y, Z, teachers should just X, Y, Z, without really thinking about the other pressures for them. Because, when I'm seeing kids, this is all I do, this is all I think about. I only think about this one little sliver of their life, which is for them an hour, perhaps a
Mm.
week, but for me is my entire life. So it's definitely really hard to balance that. And I think it's been a combination of being particular about the people who are best suited to the services that I provide. I think that's been something that I have developed over time.
Mm.
And for me, I think that looks like for me to offer a high quality intervention service, it requires buy-in from the families. It requires buy-in from the kid, especially. And it requires buy-in from the teachers as well. And unless all of those things are present, I know it's not going to be super successful. And for some families, they don't need a speech pathologist doing literacy intervention. Like they can have a tutor, they'll
Mm.
be fine.
Mm.
I end up seeing the kids who have a little something extra going on. At which point, um, I think it's easy for outsiders to look at me as like a very fancy tutor
Mm.
because they don't really understand all the extra stuff that goes into it, all the language, all the kind of sneaky speech stuff, all the artic stuff that goes into it.
Mm.
There's so much. So I guess I take responsibility for what I have control over,
Mm.
to be honest. And I, accept the other moving parts that I don't have control over. But I do really love working with clients in schools, like in the classroom, because I do get an opportunity to partner with teachers a bit more and understand a bit more about what's happening in the tier one. Because I guess another frustration I have is I'm working so hard to
Mm.
help these kids in at a tier three level. And they go back into classrooms and it's all undone. And, I just find that endlessly frustrating. So I guess I much prefer it when I'm able to partner with teachers and meet them where they're at, I
Mm.
guess, wherever that looks like on the journey, and try and collaborate as much as possible. So yeah, it's a little bit of everyone pitching in.
Um, I really like that you've said that, Kaya. It reminds me of Dr. Tiffany Hogan's
Mm,
massive advice that, and her work is in developmental language disorder and dyslexia. But
mm,
that idea of who are the key stakeholders, while we may have a lot of knowledge around it, we're not the ones that are necessarily working with the student over a long period of time.
yeah.
There are lots of other key stakeholders, but slowly, again, it makes me think of a bit like a scope and sequence, starting
Mm,
a little bit simple with what's manageable and then building on top of it and building that complexity because that's how I learned. That's how
yeah.
I was able to impart knowledge, and I still, till today, have to go simple first and then go complex. Yeah.
I think our background and our training has given us an amazing capacity to look at something incredibly complex and break it down,
Yes.
and I think that training has really helped me to look at, when a kid walks through my door and they are a 3D complex human being to try and, tease apart what's going on and how I can help them.
Mm.
And I think one of the most frustrating things I find in my work is I often see kids who are so disengaged, who are
Mhm.
so just angry with reading or writing or whatever it is for them. And I know in my heart that it takes time to build the rapport, to build that trust, to get them coming regularly so that we can build up those skills. But it also, it, I guess maybe it's the imposter syndrome, but it also doesn't feel very nice at the end of, a 45-minute session when you don't really have anything to show for it. And, you're still asking the parents to hand over a bunch of money. It's it can be really hard sometimes, but I think, taking the time to build relationships with these kids, especially and understand, I
Mm.
think what I learnt or a phrase that has stuck with me throughout my speech pathology and onwards is behavior is communication. And the idea of looking past what what might be triggering for me or might annoy me to what are they actually saying. And I think it's helpful for me to remember that for that kid, their parent is asking them to come to a room filled with words
Mm.
that they may or may not like, to sit down with a person that's going to make them do something that is so incredibly hard and uncomfortable. And that is like exhausting, you know?
Yeah.
So it's helpful for me to remember not everyone loves this as much as I do. And to look past the behavior that might be presenting itself and take the time to get to know these kids and what is important to them and what is going to make a difference to their lives, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, rather than just, my agenda.
And again, so many important points have been highlighted in that 3 minutes of 3 minutes of conversation. But a child is a 3D complex being. One of my first jobs in speech pathology was working with early intervention,
Mm,
not to six kids with disabilities, but with their parents and that key work model. But thinking about now, these are kids with disabilities that are growing up, they need to be able to develop their language, but it's not just language. They're having to develop their other systems, their motor systems and sensory
mm,
systems and cognitive systems, like all of these interplays. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm only a new grad. Well, I don't even know about speech pathology, but we're having to really have a look at these kids and think about what's at play here. And there are multiple things at play, multiple things to prioritize. But in that learning, at schools today, that is what I really appreciate about that job is actually thinking
mm.
about the child, being able to start pulling them apart, but then also thinking about them as that whole and going
Absolutely.
to that. Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And it's really important to partner with the families as well, because I think the kids I work with, I do see them for a long period of time. And it's really important for me to have that discussion with the families up front to be like, hey, this is probably what it's going to look like. But you've got a lot going on, like if you need to stop for a term or two to go see the OT, that's totally fine. If you need to, if we need to stop for a little while so that you can focus on, being a kid. That is okay too, because I think therapy fatigue is a real concern and a valid concern. And if we're not getting that, hmm, I don't know. I guess I just watch the kid and I look at what the kid's up to, and you can tell when they need a break.
Yes,
And I think
absolutely.
allowing them to take a break and helping the parents be okay with taking a break as well, because for them, and rightly so, there is such an urgency, there is such like this is their baby, like it's so
Mm.
important to them that, it doesn't get mucked up or whatever. But I also know that these kids who come to me, that we got to hold them gently,
Mm.
we've got to hold them gently and give them the time to be more than just the kid I see in my room, like to go play basketball, to go, have friends, to go see the million other people they've got on their to-do list because, they've got a lot going on. Yeah.
And Kaya, that also leads me to think about that idea of processes and strategies
Mm,
versus the outcome.
yes.
That really creating the foundation within
Mm,
what is the process in this? What are we actually trying? What are we going to do to get to the outcome? But
yes.
also what can be generalized in lots of different contexts. So those high utility processes and strategies to be able to then help you with the outcome. Almost thinking of
Yes.
that outcome as the byproduct, but it's these things that are going to create that. And that's where that energy, effort, you're putting your sweat, blood, and tears into.
Absolutely. And I think showing parents what success and what progression looks like is so important too, because I think, especially with dyslexia, um, progress is not linear. And families can get really disheartened by that because, we expect a trend to continue, And I think with the knowledge I have, I'm really able to support families through that. And there is really a lot of counseling involved, I think, and a lot of advocacy work as well, because we are trying to figure out, okay, so what is the process? What is the system that I can do here in this, in my clinic, four walls? What can be done at school? What can be done at home? And how can we all work together towards this common goal? Yeah, it's really tricky.
Um, Thank you so much for delving into that part of the conversation. Yeah, there is no one answer or no sort of right or wrong. It's really such a personalized one. The other question I had for you was your research project with the Solar Lab.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that project, what it was about, and then later on what you're teaching.
Absolutely. Well, it's still in progress. And I will caveat by saying I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say. So I'll just keep it pretty general if that's okay.
Absolutely.
But Tanya and co are looking into the impact of having um, uh, uh, a coach supporting literacy instruction. That's kind of it in its simplest form. And so, excuse me. Um, there are a bunch of us coaches, and we are all assigned a school or two. And we collaborate with the F to 2 team to really meet them where they're at and try and provide whatever support we can. We're using this model called student focused coaching, which I think is really interesting. I haven't come across anything like it before. And I think it really speaks to my strength as a speechy because it is about the student and advocating for the students and using, I guess, almost like a case study model to see, if this student is having these difficulties, what can we do to support this student? And what kind of impact would that have on the rest of the classroom as well?
Mhm.
So that is running for 2 years. This will be my second year of working with the school, and it has just been an amazing journey. Like once again, being invited into spaces where I don't well, I guess I am allowed in a lot of classrooms, but I guess with a bit more purpose and intent, and being able to provide that extra information that a speechy can, that extra nuance to the conversation is really interesting. And I know that it can be really daunting for the teachers because, I am not a teacher as well, and I don't have that kind of street cred. But what I think we've really come to understand is like rather than looking at what I don't have, looking at the kind of information I do have and the kind of skills I do have, because speeches are a kind of teacher, really. We just work in very, very small classrooms.
Yes.
I mean, ultimately, our primary job is to get someone to do something they may or may not want to do. So
Mhm.
that's teaching them how to do something they couldn't before. And that is really a type of teaching. So
Mm.
there's been a lot of things that I can carry over into this work, and it's been incredibly rewarding working with these teachers, seeing what kind of impact we can make, and I think more importantly, seeing what change looks like in a school,
Yeah.
seeing the realities of it. What are the barriers? What are the facilitators? What is what is it that can be changed, and how long do we expect change to happen? Like how long does it take to change? These are
Yeah.
all really interesting questions that I've been able to I guess, grapple with through this project. And I'm really grateful for that. Um, it's been an amazing opportunity to build relationships and to have those good conversations. So, yeah, I'm really happy with the work that I've done there. But it was at the first training day for that where someone turned around and said, "Hey, we need a couple of extra teachers. Can you give us a hand?" And I was just like, "Sure, why not?" So I started teaching at in the School of Education at La Trobe. I was teaching do you know what? It's so fun. It's the one of the very first subjects that the the undergraduates have,
Yeah.
and there's something. Oh, there's something so almost pediatric about it. Like
Yeah.
they are so fresh. They are
Yeah.
so curious. They are so driven. I was really worried I wouldn't like working with adults because I've been in peds land for so long, pediatrics. But it turns out it's the same. They're just a bit bigger.
Yeah.
Um, um, and it's been so amazing. So I've taught that, and then I've also taught another subject about how humans learn, which was wonderful to bring together, I guess, my speech knowledge and my psych knowledge. So that was really good. And then I've also done some clinical supervision, both at La Trobe and for ACU, working with students, speech pathology students. And then also working as it's called a PBL facilitator. So a part of the model of the La Trobe speech pathology master's course is delivered through problem-based learning, which has been very interesting to grapple with, given what I've been working with in the School of Education. It's been very interesting to see those two hats. But part of my role there is to create almost like a microcosm of like a working environment, I guess,
Mm.
to recreate what it looks like to sit down with other speeches and do a case,
Yeah.
like unpack a case and ask questions and work through that. And that has been amazing too, because I've been able to build relationships with these students and also, um, I guess, I knew what to give more emphasis on, I guess, because when they're left to their own devices, they're like, oh, a role play, we'll just skip that. And I'm just like, no, we will do the role play. Here's how we're going to do it. But I think what I really loved about my PBL experience this time was the because of the background of knowledge that I have from the School of Education, I was able to really scaffold the
Yeah.
students' experience and really help them to know what it was they're looking for, I guess, and being able to manage the time that we had so that we had time to do those things and to really talk about those things. So yeah, I'm really proud of the work I did with the PBL as well. It's been a busy year.
But it sounds like an incredibly fruitful year with
Yes.
so many different facets of learning. And like you said at the very start of our conversation, speech pathology is diverse. You cover lots of different fields, and that's exactly what you've showcased in this
Yes.
conversation.
Absolutely. I think when I was doing the PBL cases, because it does cover, the full gamut of speech pathology, I was really worried. I was like, oh my goodness, have I forgotten everything about stuttering? Have I forgotten everything about, acquired stroke? Like it was really encouraging to know that I hadn't forgotten it. It was all still there and how much I use different parts of it all the time. Yeah.
That's amazing. Kaya, we will be wrapping up our conversation, but before we do, has there been anything you've wanted to share and I haven't asked you?
No, not specifically. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. It's been really lovely to, I guess, find our way through this conversation, see where it goes. Yeah.
Thank you. And for anybody that's listening to this conversation, could be anywhere in the world, any demographic, what are some key takeaways you'd like for them to ponder over?
Yes. Okay. Um, a couple of things. I think I've been working with teachers more and more lately, and I see from them, and sorry, it's not just teachers, it's just people generally, but there is um there is a frustration that science keeps changing, that research keeps changing, and that ideas keep changing. And I think helping people understand that science is so much a dialogue. It's what we know. How can I explain this? Like, what we know about the world or our own brains is because someone poked it and made
Mhm.
some observations. And then they poked it again with that knowledge in mind. So it is always a conversation. It is always shifting and changing. And I think changing your mind about something or being exposed to new ideas and seeing where they lead is so incredibly vital. I think rather than attaching you attaching, I guess, an identity with being right or with one particular ideology. I would love to see more people engage with curiosity
Yeah.
and be curious and open. Um, and I think second to that is more of a question for me, perhaps, but I'm really curious as to why teachers in particular don't feel very invited into those science research spaces. Because I think I take my background in speech pathology for granted there in knowing how to examine literature and how to critique things and really analyze something. And I'd love for teachers to have that too. So I try where possible to have them included in and to bring them into the research so that they know that it's for them. It
Mm.
is for them. And I guess my final thing is, if you're a teacher, if you're a speechy, if you're a parent, and you feel like you're fighting it on your own, you're not alone. There are so many people out there. There are so many resources out there. And, when I go to like sharing best practice, for example, a sharing best practice event, there is just such an amazing camaraderie there where you're just with people who are all wanting to do the best for children and so aligned. It's a beautiful feeling. So, if you're feeling alone, um, you don't need to. We are out here.
Thank you so much, Kaya, for your generosity, your time, your energy, patience with my questions.
No, it's
Um,
been so beautiful. Thank you.
And for everyone else that's going to be listening to this conversation, it will be available on Human Chapters YouTube channel, Human Chapters podcast, and Facebook page. Please share it with others. It would be awesome to get people listening to the conversation, perhaps thinking about different things and yeah, learning something. Thank you all
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you so much.